Be thou my vision, O Lord of my
Pastor Jim Taylor from Haven Baptist Church in sunny Kunsan in South Korea, and it's cold. It's cold. It's wintertime here in Korea, and Kunsan. We sit right on the coast, on the western coast. And if you want to look at a map of Korea, look at South Korea. We're like halfway down on the western coast. Anyway, so I've been asked a couple of times over the course of the last few years, actually, to talk about the ESV Bible translation. I had, in fact, done a video on that earlier, but back then I didn't have really the software to make the videos look good, or the equipment to get the volume or the sound right and all that sort of thing. So it sounded like I was speaking in like a tunnel or something. And so this is really actually kind of a remake. But anyway, the question was, and they asked that the ESV is getting to be very popular translation. A lot of people are speaking very highly of it. Can you tell me more about it and whether or not I can actually trust it as a translation? So I want to try to give you some information on the ESV, and then you can, after listening to this, clearly you'll understand what I think, and then pray about it and make a valid biblical decision. And that's what we need to do, not only in Bible translations, but really in everything. So it's true the ESV is becoming very popular. In fact, since 2014, it's been one of the top Bible translations sold, not the top, but one of the top Bible translations sold. In the last, since 2014, what's that, 17 years now, it's an estimated about 200 million ESVs have been sold worldwide. ESV, by the way, stands for English Standard Version. It was released initially in 2001. And then they made some minor revisions a few times in 2007, 2011, 2016. From their own website, this is what they said. They said that the English Standard Version is an essentially literal translation of the Bible in contemporary English. Essentially literal means that they did their best to go from the Greek and the Hebrew to English. They go on to say it was created by a team of more than 100 leading evangelical scholars and pastors. The ESV Bible emphasizes word-for-word accuracy, literal or literary excellency, and depth of meaning. Now, not long ago, the ESV Oversight Committee, that basically the Oversight Committee is a group of people who their responsibility is to have oversight over the ESV translation. And so they had decided that they'd brought their translation to the point where it was good enough now, and they didn't need to work on it anymore. So they stopped. And in their words, this is what they said. They said the ESV Bible will remain unchanged in all future editions, printed and published by Crossway, in much the same way that the King James Version has remained unchanged ever since the final KJV text was established almost 250 years ago. So they're going back to the 1769 edition of the KJV, which is really the one that, if you use a King James today, there's a lot of people that go, I use a KJV 1611. Well, actually, you really don't, okay? You're really using the final revision, which I don't want to say revision, actually, final edition of it, that came out in 1769, where, over the years from 1611 to 1769, they fixed some publishing errors, they fixed some printing errors, they fixed some spelling errors, they fixed some grammatical things. So they're basically what they're saying is, the ESV is as good as we're going to get it, and we're not going to work on it anymore. It's frozen in time now, basically. And so they called their final revision the permanent text of the ESV. And their last revision included 52 changes to about 29 verses. Okay, so it wasn't really a big change on the big scheme of things. The Bible has, I think, 32,102 verses, and they tweaked 29 of those verses. So the foundation of their translation work was, and this is what they used the Revised Standard Version, the English Revised Standard Version, and they tweaked it or translated it from the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which is a word I always have a hard time saying. It's much easier to read it or spell it than to say it, I think. And that's the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, they use the critical text, or some people call it the Nestle-Aland text, the United Bible Society text. Are basically the same thing, okay? I just call it the critical text. So if I say critical text, that's what I'm talking about. So the translators of the ESV, they basically took the RSV, which was translated from the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, and the critical text. So they took the RSV, which was translated from that, and they tweaked it to become a more of a formal equivalent translation, and they called it the optimal equivalence. That's what they wanted to call it. So they're saying it's the optimal equivalence of the original languages. Okay. In their own words, however, they also said that they looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, not a very good one either, but it is one. The Samaritan Pentateuch, the Syriac Peshitta, the Latin Vulgate, and then a few other things that they believed would help to shed light on the Old Testament Hebrew text. And I want to pause there for a moment and say this. If you have ever been involved in Bible translation from the original languages, whether it's using what I believe to be the superior text, or even if you use the other ones, everybody that I know that seriously has done this has come across words in the Old Testament specifically, and the New Testament is a little bit different, but I'm just talking Old Testament right now. They'll come across words in the Old Testament that's like used only one time. And since you're doing a translation, you're probably not going into English. We got plenty of those. I understand we got like 600 English translations now. But you're probably going to another language, a foreign language. Like I live in Korea, so I'm familiar with going from, Hebrew into Korean. And so you see a word in Hebrew that's used only one time and, in the Old Testament. And you're like, oh man, I wonder, can I get a little bit more light on the inferences of these words? Because as you know, words have broad meanings. There are certain words, I like to call them umbrella words. And then there are other words that fit under that mean the same thing, kind of, but maybe more specific. I guess the only example that comes to mind right now would be like automobile. Automobile would be like an umbrella word. And then underneath that, you might have sedan or Chevrolet or SUV or something like that. And so they're not the same, but sometimes when you're translating, you come across a word and it's like, man, I really want a more exact understanding of this meaning because I'm going to another language. So I look at the English, I look at the Hebrew, and then I'm looking at everything else until my mind and the fog in my head is cleared on what that one word means so that I can choose the correct word in the target language. And that's the way translation work goes. So I'm not knocking these guys for looking at a bunch of other sources, okay? That's, everybody does that. Everybody that I know does that, except there's a group of people that they're like, I'm just going to translate from the King James only. Bless God, that's good enough. And, if all you can do is that, that's fine. But if you can look at Greek and Hebrew, I highly recommend you do that because languages have limitations. English is no different than any other language. It's got limitations. And so the limitations in English may not exist in your target language, whatever you're going into. So I really got off the beaten track here. So let me try to work my way back to the ESV. So what they did is they looked at all of this other stuff to help give them an understanding in their own words of what the Hebrew manuscript said in the Old Testament. So that's not really that big of an issue with me. The essential problem and the most basic problem to the ESV is that it is based upon inferior Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. It's ironic that they actually claim to be following in the tradition of the Tyndale translation and the KJV. It's kind of ironic to me because that's not even remotely possible since the ESV, by all intents and purposes, is nothing more than a revision of a translation. Remember I said that they went from another translation and they tweaked it and then they went into the ESV, right? So it's a revision of another translation that's based upon different Hebrew and Greek texts. A good number of other scholars have also come to the same conclusion. I say other scholars. I don't consider myself a scholar. Some people do. I know better. But anyway, other people that looked into this issue, let me say it that way, they've come to the same conclusion. But rather than talk about the elephant in the room, the ESV publishers just quietly kind of ignore that fact. They don't talk about it at all. So I won't say it all. I haven't read everything they wrote, but as far as I know, they don't address that very much at all. So since the ESV is not based on the Textus Receptus, you should expect to find differences. Why? Because the Textus Receptus is the Greek manuscript that the King James is translated from. And the critical text, which is a different Greek text, is the one that the ESV is taken from. So if that's a literal, formal, equivalent translation, which from what I can see it pretty much is, and the King James is a formal equivalent translation of the Textus Receptus, these two Greek texts don't match each other. So you would expect that this translation would have differences from this translation because this Greek manuscript has differences from this Greek manuscript. You can expect there to be differences. There's quite a number of verses that you're going to find in the KJV that are just not even in the ESV. And the reason is because those same verses are not in the critical text from which the ESV was translated. There are also phrases that are missing in quite a number of other verses as well. And there, you can go out to the internet and you can find several lists on the internet. And I went out and I looked at everything they had and I used a little bit of critical thinking. And, usually what happens is some guy who really, really hates the ESV, he'll come up with a list of, 450 different things that are wrong with it. But once you really start looking into it, you can kind of whittle the list down a little bit. So I'm going to give you some of the things that I think are some big issues as far as I'm concerned with it. And so if you're interested, you can go out there and look at information and study it out for yourself. But here are some things that I think are more critical issues. So I'm going to read to you Matthew 19:9 from the KJV. And the Matthew 19:9 says, "And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery." Now that's in the KJV. Now here is the ESV rendering of the same verse. "And I say unto you," this is Matthew 19:9 in case you forgot, "I say unto you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." So in the ESV, the phrase about "whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery," that's not even there. And that's critical, because without this phrase, one could conclude that it is acceptable to marry a woman who is divorced when Jesus is clearly saying otherwise. And divorce and remarriage is another video, okay? And I believe I already have one out there on that. If not, maybe I'll do one of these days. But, you can debate what the conditions are all day long, but you can't just simply remove the phrase, okay? Which is what they pretty much have done. And then you've got Mark chapter 1, verse 2. In Mark chapter 1, verse 2 in the ESV, it says this, "As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way." So this is Mark 1:2, and in Mark 1:2, it is written in Isaiah the prophet, and then he quotes from Isaiah the prophet. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is it's not written in Isaiah. That particular phrase, "Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way," that's not in Isaiah. In John chapter 3, verse 13, the KJV says this. It says, "And no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he which came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven." Now that's in the KJV for John 3:13. In the ESV it says this, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." I really think that this is a very unfortunate deletion, because the phrase, "even the Son of Man, which is in heaven," that phrase, "which is in heaven," is the phrase that's missing from the ESV. And I think it's very unfortunate, because this particular phrase teaches us the omnipresence of Christ. Though he was here in his earthly ministry, he said, even the Son of Man, which is, present tense, in heaven. So here's Jesus. He's sitting down with Nicodemus when he says this. Now, he is clearly saying that he is in heaven. Now, frankly, I don't know any other verse from the earthly ministry of Christ that makes this as clear as we see it here. So as far as I can see, this is a very, very unfortunate deletion from the ESV. All right, let's move on. John chapter 7, verse 8. Again, it says this, go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. And then in the ESV, you go up to the feast. I am not going up to the feast, for my time has not yet fully come. So in the KJV, there's that little word yet. I go not up yet. In the ESV, the word yet is missing. The absence of that little word yet makes Jesus a liar in the ESV. Because in the ESV, Jesus told his brothers he wasn't going to go to the feast. And then later he went. I don't know what you're going to do with that. I know what I'm going to do with that. I just look at that and I go, they didn't do that very well. One of the more plain errors in the ESV, and you see that, by the way, in a lot of modern translations, is the fact that Elhanan is said to be the slayer of Goliath. And, you can read that in the ESV in 2 Samuel chapter 21:19. Elhanan. You know the story. Everybody knows the story. Even, you can find a child who has attended Sunday school knows that David killed Goliath. The reason for this translation error is that the faulty ESV textual basis says that. Okay? So if your Bible says Elhanan killed Goliath, well, first of all, that's an error. And even if it clarifies it, a lot of times they'll clarify it in a footnote. But it's still an error. The reason why is because they're going from the wrong textual basis. And so, it's an error, even if they clarify it. If your Bible has even one error, then, you have to say that it's not perfect. Okay? It's that simple. One of the more controversial changes was, and this was actually debated quite strongly, was Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. The ESV translators, they changed their earlier translation. In an earlier translation in Genesis 3:16, in their earlier translation, they said, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And they changed it to, one of their later editions to say, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. So you can see the difference between your desire is for your husband to your desire is contrary to your husband. These are opposites, okay? So the woman's desire is for her husband. She desires her husband. Then, in one of their later editions, your desire would be contrary to your husband. In other words, your wife is not going to want anything to do with you, or she doesn't want what you want, basically. Now, the KJV says this. It says, thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. That's what the KJV says. So the ESV sets it in stone that the woman, all women, because when Jesus said that to Eve, he was actually speaking of, the curse upon Adam was upon all. The curse upon Eve was for the women, and that sort of thing. Anyway, so the ESV sets the tone that all women will always have a natural tendency to be contrary to the husband. And that's just simply not what the Hebrew says. All right? Remember, that was their little tweak. Their first tweak was, your desire shall be for your husband, and then they changed it to your desire shall be contrary to your husband. And so, but that's not what it says in the Hebrew. I had originally thought, when I was looking into this, that the ESV avoided gender-neutral language. If you know anything about translations, or that's kind of your forte, and you look into that sort of thing from time to time, you'll know that there are translations out there that seek to be gender-neutral. Okay, but originally I thought the ESV was the same way. I thought that they tried to avoid this whole gender-neutral language movement that's going on, but that wasn't always the case. And you're saying, well, what's the danger? What's the danger if they change it from all man to all people or something like that? The danger is formal equivalency. That's the danger, okay? Formal equivalency. So I've been rambling on for about 20 minutes and chased rabbits all over the place. So let me just kind of summarize some things, all right? There are some negative things about the ESV. Almost all of them are, textual, meaning it's based upon the foundation, which is different. So, that's the big problem. Some are translational, but none of the changes are warranted. There was no reason to make any of those changes. So that kind of wraps up my thoughts on the ESV. If you were to ask me if I would use the ESV, I would say no. I use the King James. I've used the King James since I first got saved, and I came across this whole textual criticism issue many years ago. At that time, I was kind of like, well, as long as it's a really good translation, it doesn't really matter. And somebody challenged me to look into it, and I did. And I came away believing some things that made me see some things that I didn't see before. In doing so, I got a lot of notes. I bought a lot of books. I must have read 30 books on the issue, not to mention hundreds of web pages and, sermons that I listened to in the whole 9 yards. Anyway, so the bottom line was I ended up writing a book on it. And let me give you a shameless plug for my book. You can go out on Amazon and look up In Defense of the Textus Receptus, and you can buy the book out there. I think that it's worth reading no matter what your current position is. It's got a lot of information in there, historical, doctrinal. Someone called it a faith-based approach. They criticized me with that. I felt like I was being commended. I think everything in life ought to be a faith-based approach. Excuse me, I'm a Christian. That's what, that's how I got into this thing, was by faith. And so anyway, without beating that too much, so you can go out there on Amazon. It's also available in Barnes and Nobles, and you can go to. There's several other places where you can actually buy it. You can get it as an ebook or a paperback or hard copy. Old Past Publishers sells hard copies of it. If you like that sort of thing. Anyway, so it's out there, and I'd put that out there for you. Also, I also want to make another shameless plug. If what I'm saying is interesting to you and you want to hear more, or if what I'm saying irritates you and you just want to see how stupid that I can actually get, subscribe to my channel, okay? The channel actually belongs to our church, and we put out sermons and videos of music that we do sometimes, Sunday school lessons, and just all kinds of stuff that's related to the Haven Baptist Church. And this is kind of something that I do on the side. I try to do about once a week, but it's tough to do that sometimes. But anyway, I try to put some good stuff out there from people that ask me questions. So send me questions. I'll add it to my list, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. With that, may you be found walking in the reality of God's presence this week. May you know the God of peace, personally giving you peace in your heart because you know Him. God bless you, and have a great day.